ladies. We are welcoming Allison. She is from New Jersey by way of Australia today. And there's a super cool story she was sharing with us about that. But we are going to continue the conversation that we have been having accidentally, but the world wanted us to have it about our intuition and trusting ourselves and knowing when we're on the right path. So, welcome, Allison.
Thank you so much, Gillian. It's great to be here.
I want to kind of jump right in with the story of your move. And how did you know that you were on the right path and to
Mm,
trust your gut? Because that is a super big path.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. And I want to say I've been in a process of cultivating intuition probably over the last couple of decades. So I wasn't a stranger to it. And I think it was almost kind of something I felt I had to do. And this was because I grew up probably quite introverted, awkward, but quite psychic. And I didn't really know that that was what was happening. I really didn't know that I had a high degree of empathy until I started doing massage therapy work about 25 years ago. And I put my hands on people and I could actually feel like they had a stomach ache. I would have a stomach ache. Their knee hurt. My knee hurt. And all of a sudden, that started making sense why I've always felt things that I couldn't explain. So long story short, I've spent a lot of time working with mentors and really supporting the growth of intuition. And I've always said developing your intuition is probably the greatest gift you could give yourself because you don't have to look outside for any sort of confirmation. You just feel it and know, and it's clear. And that's something I really support my clients in as well, is really finding their ground and really knowing what they feel and being able to trust it so that they're not deceived. They're not led astray, as I feel like this world is a very tricky place to be in for a lot of reasons. So how do we, hold that gnosis that I feel like is so second nature to women, or maybe even first nature to women, right? We have a strong gnosis. I'm going to say more than men most of the time. And we just have never been taught to trust it. We've never been taught to, value feeling and value that level of what we actually hold as a gift. So that's part one of it. And the second part of how I got here is really I had had extraordinary traumatic relationships with men, probably most of my adult life. Every kind of thing I experienced, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Not that I even have a worst enemy, but lots of trauma, betrayal, and, all sorts of things that were just super intense. And it was like, when am I going to be done with this? And this, is a very particular piece that I think a lot of people may either have an easy or a hard time relating to. But basically, I had grown up Roman Catholic, and at some point in time, I realized that that really didn't work for me. And I ended up throwing this idea of God out the window. I didn't want anything to do with sort of what I received in my earlier days. And there was just so many things that didn't resonate. One also being the fact that I didn't see a lot of women. I'm like, where are the women? Where are the women's stories? So there was a lot of things for me that were dissonant. And again, I don't mean to share this because I know religion and God can be a polarizing thing, but I'm just sharing my experience here because it was a big piece of how I got here. I realized that, I got to my late 30s or so, and things were hard, really hard, and they continued to be really hard. And I had to go through some really deep other forms of pain before I would come to the realization that I felt like I was abandoned from God, or I felt like I was just on my own, doing it all on my own. No one was there. Everything was hard. That was the way it was going to be. And I ended up working with a mentor. Actually, she's been somebody I've been working with over the last 5 or 6 years. And she and a few other women that I was connecting to made me also really see that there was this big gaping hole of, I could trust what I felt, but I definitely felt like I was, either cast out of the garden or things were just meant to be hard for me. So I really had to go through the ego death of realizing that I had basically turned away and walked away from connecting to what people would call source energy, God, what Holy Mother, Holy Father, whatever words you use. I feel like it's a
Mhm.
personal thing for everybody. But I really realized in that moment that, okay, I've thrown the baby out with the bathwater in terms of
Mhm.
connection. Even though I was very spiritual and I was doing all these other things, all these new
Yeah.
age, whatever it was, right? Nothing was actually holding me. It was like I had to actually fall so hard to realize that that was the thing that was missing
Mhm.
most. So it was having a bringing back a relationship with a masculine experience of God or a Christ consciousness or whatever version of a holy masculine consciousness that I could start trusting, because I realized I looked around in my life and I did not trust at all. And I was wired to bring in a certain kind of person in my life that was
Mhm.
going to do, one of three things, betray, abandon, or reject me. It was just going to be something like that. So, long story short, I went about a process of really rewiring what it was like to be back in relationship and receive and be held by a holy
Mhm.
masculine that I felt like I could trust in a spirit form. Because again, I didn't feel like I had a practical living example of something of that nature. So I think I gave myself, it was about a month and a half perhaps, where I had this practice of really allowing myself to meet those parts of myself that were really hurt, really angry, really frustrated, really annoyed, and bring it to that holy masculine, to bring it and to feel that I was being connected to and sourced and held. And through that, my nervous system really began to reset itself. And I was kind of dating, and then I'd get out around men and I'd be like, oh God, I can kind of see what this guy's all about right now. Whereas before my chemistry cocktail would
Mhm.
have gone on and I would have like been attracted to this. But I'm like, whoa. So there was a discernment that I started noticing happening. So when I came to Australia to teach my embodied dance teacher training here, and then I was here hanging out, he met the man who was now my husband. I didn't know that that was true at the time, but the way that this kind of goes full circle probably into our conversation is that when I sat next to him and I closed my eyes, I could feel my body felt safe. I felt relaxed. I felt calm and my heart felt open. And I could really sense that I didn't know who he was, but he had the capacity to actually hold my heart. And that was not something that I ever remember experiencing before or realizing in any way. I'm sure there's, other men that could as well. But my body gave me the indication through that rewiring process that I did with what I'll call the holy masculine aspect of God or source to let me know that this person's okay. Like you can share and be who you are and they've got you. And I could feel that very truly in my body. So it only really took a matter of time and conversations and long distance before we kind of both really figured it out. And then I moved here 6 months after.
And
So it was
now,
a pretty big whirlwind.
when you were having those conversations, mainly with yourself, were you at a point with trusting your intuition that you knew you were good with this? Or were you still kind of on shaky ground, like, I'm moving across the world?
Uh, That's a good question. I feel like what we did that was really helpful that I would actually really recommend as a process to a lot of people is we did a practice called authentic relating. And authentic relating is a practice that has 5 principles. And I'm going to forget what they all are, but basically it's staying with the other person no matter what's happening and not reacting or responding, but just staying with them on a somatic level. So
Okay.
staying with them and also allowing that person to speak from their experience. So it's staying with that person in their experience, staying with your experience, not making that person right or wrong, but just simply sharing what each of you is feeling. When I heard you say that you went over there
Mhm.
and that happened for you, I could notice that my heart felt really tight. I could
Mhm.
notice then that I started thinking and wondering if that were true, and basically really sharing more of your inner world and
Mhm.
experience with someone. So it was through that process that we got really close because a lot of depth came up for the both of us pretty quickly. He's also a therapist and a counselor, and he's,
Okay.
done a lot of work on himself. So it was the right person to have that kind of a
Mhm.
conversation. He could lead that kind of process, which was also very different for me. So it was us really committing to a process of how we were relating in terms of our intimacy that gave
Mhm.
us the depth of understanding of who that person really was. And I did also come over here for a month. I came over and I
Okay.
really just checked it out. And I said, okay, just let's make sure we're not making this up. And
Right.
let's see if we actually get along in the day to day. Like, I'm going to
Mhm.
come over and hang out with you for a month and see. And then we realized, like, oh, wow, we actually just laugh a lot together. And this is easy. Okay. So then once I knew that, I was like,
Mhm.
that's when I was like, okay, I'm done. I think I'm ready to come and give this a
I love
go.
that. So then after you kind of went through your journey, so you know, like, okay, this is real, this is possible. How did you kind of dig in deeper too, discovering your intuition and discovering just that you could learn more about yourself and the world through yourself? If there's the best way I can describe it.
Yeah, yeah. At this point or earlier on?
At that point, after you had met your husband and moved to Australia.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is I very much trusted being here, this area that I'm in specifically, because I was here back in the late 90s. I did part of my undergraduate degree in cultural anthropology about 45 minutes down the
Oh,
road.
wow.
So I was very familiar with this area and I love this area. And I knew that it was a really good place for me. So that in itself was a blessing and a gift. I knew that I was going to feel supported and connected
Mhm,
and, kind of be okay here. But I'd say even more so, it was a continuing to pay attention to how I feel. So the main basis of embodied dance and what I really walk people through, and it sounds foundational and fundamental, but it's really easy to miss because we haven't been taught it, which is just how to really hold your perceptions, sensations, and feelings and to use them as information.
mm,
So we often are just taught logic over heart when I
mhm,
don't ever feel like that was the way it was supposed to be. We're not supposed to be these talking heads that just walk around completely disconnected from what we feel, handing our bodies over to
mhm.
whoever, whether it be medical field or whatever, and saying, I don't know what to do because I can't touch this. You tell me what to do, right? How do we become more an advocate for our own
Mhm.
bodies because we can trust what we feel? I
Yep.
think this is such a critical piece that is going to it could really change things for people if they are able to really begin that process of trust and being
Mhm.
able to say like, this is what I know. This is what I can sense. This does not feel right for me and I'm going to follow it.
We've just been talking a lot about discovering
Mm,
that inner voice, that intuition. And then once you discover it, allowing yourself to listen to it. I think
mm,
that alone is tough for a lot of folks, myself included, because you're like, hush now, pipe down. We have a brain for that. Why are
mm,
you getting involved in the conversation? And then once you kind of get past that step, then it's allowing yourself to trust that this new voice inside your body that has not been vetted, that has no credentials that I know of,
mm.
has your best interest at heart. And so kind of walk us through what that journey is
Yeah.
for someone to kind of get to that place of trust.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of practice. And I have an easy tool that I can share around it that can help you. But I will preemptively say that the emotional body is incredibly intelligent and it can be very tricky to decipher because we have a lot of wounds that we often haven't looked at or met with compassion. So sometimes when something comes up that feels like a very strong awareness of something, it can often be coming from an old fear because of something that
Mm,
happened in the past. So how do you know the difference,
mhm,
right? Between a trauma part of you that's going, oh no, I'm not going to be safe, that's trying to protect you, right? So the majority of what I work through with people is a lot of limiting beliefs. And we do that by feeling what we feel in the body and following a trail of breadcrumbs to what it's really
mhm.
connected to. So I'll give that tool in a minute. But
Yeah.
just to kind of break down the process that I usually lead people through inside of this is we'll be talking about a particular subject, something that's up for someone, a concern. It could be a health issue, a relationship issue, whatever it is. And I'll just ask them, where do you feel that activated in your body when we're talking? And just immediately, what's the first thing without you thinking about it? Like, I can feel behind my right shoulder blade or in my solar plexus or like my gut's getting a little bit and we stay with that. So there's a body of work called somatic experiencing, which I learned about after I developed this process, by the way. So I kind of developed this process. And the thing that makes my process a little different is that I bring it to dance, where
Okay.
somatic experience just talks about the somatic experience.
Yeah.
So I kind of bring mine a bit deeper into the multidimensional healing field as well as the dance, as well as expressive movement. But we really just get a sense of what are you feeling? What's there? What does it feel like? And I get them to describe it
Mm,
with as many senses as they can. Like, oh, it feels spiky, it feels like a yellowish
yeah.
color, whatever. So I get them to just describe as much as they could really sense. Like if you had to describe and have somebody draw a picture of it, what would it look like? And then once I have that information, I just say, okay, let's take a breath, noticing that you're safe and all is well in this moment. What is the earliest memory or image that you have
Mm,
feeling that way? And that's usually going to bring them to the origin of where that
mhm,
pain point is or where that resistance is coming from, where that thing happened that made them believe that they were not going to be safe, that they were not going to be okay. and we go
Mhm.
back to that particular time, and we then see what the energy is there that has not been expressed. So maybe they're holding rage, or they're holding grief,
Mhm.
or they're holding confusion about something. And we just give it a voice. We allow the body to express it. How does the body need to move to express that,
Mhm.
right? So these are parts of processes that I use. And what ends up happening is once we meet those layers and parts of ourselves that have been wounded, that have been shut down, that have been told they're not good enough, that they're not enough, that they're not
Mhm.
worthy. And we really meet it with compassion, and we're allowed to not only acknowledge it, but express what it is and then integrate it. You start taking your power back. You start feeling a
Mhm.
bit more present because it takes so much energy to suppress all of that, I've learned.
Mhm.
And again, something that I didn't ask for on some level is that I have a very strong capacity to help people heal. And this is not something I would have chosen. It's not something I think most people who are, whether you want to call yourself a healer or some, you would never choose it if you know what it entails, because that just means that
Mhm.
you're going through dark night of the soul, just so that you can hold space for this kind of
Yeah.
work, right? So that's part of the process, and I'll share the other easier process in a minute, but I just wanted to see how you're doing, or what you're noticing, or any, yeah, thoughts you have.
Well, actually, what you brought to mind was something that kind of came up with another one of I was speaking to someone who was a healer, and she kind of made mention, and I wanted to dive a little deeper with it with you,
Yeah.
was what it does take for someone who is a healer to hold space, to be that vessel. I don't think we talk enough, and I don't want to use the word respect, but I don't think we show enough appreciation for
Mm.
what it takes for someone to do that. So if you could kind of walk us through what I don't want to say ritual, but what do you do that helps you make that space and hold that space?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's not something I would have understood earlier on at all, but I do remember one of my dearest friends who, I think is probably one of the most profound healers, saying years ago, 90% of healing is holding space. And I can see now how true that is, because what you're basically do is giving people permission to be with what is. And you'd be surprised how rare that is, where you can walk into a conversation with someone and just sense immediately that you're okay, that you're not being judged, you're not being, made less of, you're not, being put in a box, but you can just feel that you're welcome. So, as the person who is holding that kind of space, what I can say that I know for sure that's gotten me there is being able to accept what is with me, to be able to look at the things that I don't think are lovable, the things that I think are problematic or wrong, or basically all of the misconceptions and judgments I have about myself. When I look at those things and I allow myself to feel them and to move through them and to go through the other side of them, I come into a place of self acceptance. And I've seen that when I've worked with people, because I do teacher trainings as well. And when
Mhm.
I help people to do that, the self acceptance creates the safety. Because when you
Mm.
can have the compassion for yourself, and when you can say, that was hard for me and that was really, effed up on some level, and I'm okay with, my humanness around it, you become a safe person to be around in terms of emotion. So people can say this is a safe space, but a lot of, I don't mean to judge in a certain regard, but unfortunately, a lot of therapists, or classically
Mhm.
trained therapists, they're not really encouraged to do the work on themselves. So when you're not doing the deeper work, when you're not asking the hard questions and sitting with those things, people can feel it. So even if you say it's a safe
Mhm.
space, they're going to know. No,
Because
your body's going to tell you otherwise.
yeah, I mean, we've talked
So,
so much about energy and feeling and your body knowing, does this do these 2 things connect? Does what I'm hearing match what I'm feeling? And I think
exactly.
that's what a lot of the adversity or animosity towards traditional treatment and classically trained therapists is that you can feel it. You can feel that that space has not been kept. You can feel that, and why a lot of folks are now kind of trending towards, because that's kind of where
Mm,
we started off when we were just kind of chatting about before we came online, was a
uh,
lot of folks have just in the last year or so really
mm,
opened up to the concept of intuition and energy and things that, and woo woo,
mm,
as we would say, because even though we can't see them and we can't really put them in books, so to speak, we can feel them, and we can
mhm,
feel them in a way that is so human and so
mm,
natural. We don't need anything else to validate it for us. So when
Right.
you're working with your clients, and I know you work with clients all over the world, how
Mm.
do you work with them to kind of go through this journey in a safe way?
How do I prepare myself or prepare them or,
How do you go through it with them since they're not sitting in the room with you for the most part?
Yeah, well, that was the beautiful thing that I didn't know until we had lockdown because I had been previously doing hands-on healing. So, I had people coming to my home and,
Yes.
going and working in these different ways and actually placing my hands on people. So what I learned during lockdown was that I was continuing to see clients, but instead what I was doing is I started leading them through these processes with my voice and doing the healing work through what I could pick up about them. Because again,
Mhm,
my intuition was quite a strong thing. So I could sit with them and I could feel them. I could feel what was happening with them. I could kind of pinpoint pretty quickly what the deeper root was, and we would just go to the deeper root. So I realized very quickly, again, that I could talk them through the process. And as I talked them through the process, again, it probably sounds strange to some people who haven't experienced this because I know we all have the capacity for intuition and to deepen
mhm,
it. It's just not something we've practiced. I've just practiced it more. That's all.
mhm. Yep.
So I've practiced it more. And I noticed again, I was just being guided. So I just like when I put my hands on people when I did massage therapy and I could hear things about what was happening for them. Once I got into speaking with them and once we started going into, okay, what was happening in their body and the story, I was being guided on what to do. Okay,
Mhm,
you're going to run this color through that organ. I want you to talk about this now.
mhm,
Okay, this. And I could just have this information, like a stream of information just comes to me. And I just learned to trust it because people consistently got better. Again, I had a mentor when I was about 26, so, about 22 years ago, and she was the first person that really allowed me to practice this. So she was somebody that I connected to who was much older than me, almost like she was like, maybe older than my mother even. And she really saw me and saw what I, had the potential for. So she allowed me to train under her and gave me a safe place to practice, gave me a safe place to really understand the information that I was getting. So once I had that feedback, I started very slowly trying it out. And,
mhm.
in very easy ways, I'm getting a little information about something right now. Is it okay if I share that with you? And after seeing that it was just I never had anybody say, "Oh, that's wrong," or "You're on the wrong track," or "That doesn't make any sense." I've never, to this day, had any of that happen. I realized that, yes, I have something that's working with and through me that helps people, and I can really trust it because I know what it feels like. And the
Mhm.
way the information comes, it's almost like I know something the way I know my first name. It just lands
Uh-huh.
neutral and clear. Like, my name is Allison. I know that you're exactly that, and it just feels
Wow.
neutral, clear. There's no emotional attachment to it. There's no fear or anxiousness around it. It's just neutral. And yeah, it's been pretty miraculous to work in that way and just to be in the divine mystery of it because I don't ever really get to know where something is going or what's
Mhm.
ultimately best for someone. But my job is just to hold space and to guide them the best way that I can.
So if someone wanted to reach out to you, if they're listening to you speak and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this is exactly I didn't know how to put words to what I needed, but
Mm,
hearing Allison speak, this is exactly what my mind, body, and soul need." How can
mm,
they reach out to you? Where can they find you? And then what can they expect
sure.
when they do work with you?
Yeah, sure. So the majority of content I put is typically on Instagram and some on Facebook as well. But my Instagram is embodied.dance. And if you go on the links, you will see some free classes that you can take. You will see some like short term, little offerings that you can jump into and
Okay.
check out. And I do some longer programs and trainings as well. I'll be doing a longer term program probably come September this year. That will be a 12-week course that will be
Mhm.
processing the emotional body through dance. This was something that I originated or started with about 25 years ago, and it's a process I've refined and teach inside of my teacher training. And for those people who feel like they are on a path of leadership and really helping others with movement and healing, I lead an embodied dance teacher training. I'm starting one this month, and then the next one won't be until 2027. So all of that information will be on the Instagram page, or you can find me on Facebook, Allison Pagano.
I love this, and I was so happy when you reached out, like, when we were kind of just doing our little pre-organization before we started recording today, I kinda let Allison know where we were with the podcast, and the podcast, yes, it started as one thing, and it has evolved, I mean, the podcast, has just become her own entity, and it
Mm,
has been a very strong and consistent thread over the last few guests talking about intuition and trusting yourself and bringing the mind, body, soul connection together because so often they are treated so, and at least here in the Western world, so independently. And if we dare try to take a step to connect them together, it's butterfly nets.
Yeah.
And, we're just kind of made to think. So I was just really happy when we sat down and started chatting that you had such a long, that you were such a strong subject matter expert with such a long history to kind of add with a different flair to kind
Mm.
of just add to the conversation that we already had. So I was
Mm.
so happy to be able to sit down with you and kind of just add to this. And yes, we will drop all this in the show notes. So if y'all are driving, please don't panic. We'll drop it all in the show notes so you can find Allison and connect with her and kind of just deepen our journey here on our intuitions. But thank you again, Allison, for
Mm.
coming on with us today.
Thank you so much, Jillian. I so appreciate you and all the work you're sharing to support women as well at this time. It's really extraordinary.
Mhm.
Thank you.